The temporary medical station in the old schoolhouse was a whirlwind of frantic movement. Outside, the distant rumble of a storm, or perhaps something heavier, vibrated through the floorboards. Families were being moved towards safety, and every second felt like a heartbeat stolen from the clock. In the corner, Maya stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the arrival log and the dusty map on the wall. "She's just a nurse," a coordinator muttered, brushing past her. "Let the experts handle the logistics." Maya didn't flinch. She picked up the radio, made one short call, and suddenly, the entire room went silent. The makeshift clinic had been established in a primary school that had long since seen its last class. Now the hallways were filled with the smell of old paper, sharp antiseptic, and the heavy, damp scent of rain-soaked clothes. Desks had been pushed together to form triage stations. There were stacks of water bottles, piles of clean blankets, and long lists of names pinned to the chalkboards. It was a place of transition, a temporary bridge between a crisis zone and a safer future. The shadows of the tall oak trees outside danced across the walls, cast by the flickering emergency lights that struggled against the encroaching gloom of the storm. The air was thick with a tension that didn't need words. It was the tension of time. Everyone was moving, everyone was shouting, and everyone was looking at their watches. In this environment, hierarchy was the law. The coordinators, dressed in reflective vests and carrying heavy tablets, were the generals. They decided who moved, where they went, and how fast they traveled. To them, the nurses were the soldiers, meant to patch wounds, record temperatures, and distribute supplies. They saw the mission as a grand equation of fuel and distance, forgetting that the variables were human lives. Maya was one of those soldiers. She was young, her hair tied back in a practical bun, and her expression was one of absolute terrifying calm. She had been assigned to the intake desk, a small wooden table near the East Gate entrance. Her job was simple: record the names, check for immediate needs, and pass the data to the central desk. It was a repetitive, exhausting task that required her to look at hundreds of faces, each one etched with the same mask of trauma. But Maya was doing more than recording names. She was a student of patterns. She understood that a system doesn't break all at once. It frays at the edges first. While the coordinators were looking at the big picture, the total numbers, the fuel reserves, the high-level directives, Maya was looking at the dust in the tires. She noticed that the vehicles returning from the East Gate were covered in a thick, heavy reddish clay that clung to the wheel wells like wet cement. But the trucks coming from the smaller, overgrown path behind the school, the North Gate, were nearly clean, carrying only a light dusting of gray silt. She noticed that every time a group was sent through the short main road, they arrived at the next station 15 minutes later than the mathematical schedule predicted. She saw the fatigue in the eyes of the drivers. She heard the way their breath came in short, jagged bursts when they reported back. Their shoulders slumped with the effort of fighting a road that was fighting them back. She began to keep a private log in the margins of her official records, a secret map of reality. 10:15 a.m., Group A departed. 10:45 a.m., Group A arrival confirmed. 15-minute lag. Red clay on tires, axle stress visible. To her colleagues, Maya was helpful, but essentially invisible. She was the one who remembered to bring tea to the exhausted doctor whose hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. She was the one who kept the children quiet with simple stories about birds and mountains. But no one expected her to understand the complex mechanics of the evacuation. "Nurse Maya, we need more bandages in Bay 3, a senior coordinator barked, barely looking at her, his eyes fixed on a glowing tablet screen. "They're already there, sir," she replied softly, her voice a calm anchor. "I restocked them 10 minutes ago while the last wave was departing." "Good. Stay focused on your list. We have a heavy intake coming in from the south. Don't worry about the logistics. That's not your concern." Maya nodded and returned to her desk. She felt the weight of being undervalued, but she didn't let it cloud her focus. She realized that the experts were treating the situation like a math problem on a clean whiteboard. They were calculating distances and speeds without considering the shifting reality of the ground. They saw a short line on a map. They didn't see the mud that was turning that line into a swampy trap. She looked at the clock. It was 11:30 a.m., A large group of elderly residents from a nearby care home was scheduled to move next. In a crisis, the elderly are the most vulnerable to the lag. A 15-minute delay in the heat and the vibration of a truck could be the difference between a stable arrival and a medical emergency. The air in the schoolhouse seemed to grow colder as she realized the danger. Maya's internal conflict was growing like the storm outside. She wasn't a strategist. She didn't have a vest with a title. She was just a nurse. If she spoke up and was wrong, she was a distraction to an already stressed team. But if she was right and she stayed silent, she was complicit in the disaster that was surely coming. She watched the lead coordinator, a man named Henderson, pointing at the east gate on the map. "This is the primary artery," he said, his voice booming with a confidence that felt increasingly brittle. "We push the next 3 waves through here. It's the fastest route to the secondary camp. We save fuel, we save time." Maya looked at her notes. She looked at the fresh layer of red mud on the boots of the soldier who had just walked through the door. She realized that the fastest route was dying. It was a beautiful lie on a piece of paper, and she was the only one who had been quiet enough to hear its final suffocating breaths. The storm outside was no longer a distant threat. The first heavy drops of rain were beginning to hammer against the school's tin roof. The sound was deafening, a rhythmic, violent drumming that made communication even more difficult. Inside the briefing room, the pressure was reaching a breaking point. The walls of the old schoolroom seemed to close in, the smell of damp earth and anxiety becoming almost unbearable. Henderson was under intense scrutiny from the city officials. The radio on the central table crackled with urgent, distorted voices. "We need those 300 people. Move before the Ridge Road becomes impassable. What is your status, Station 1? "We're on it," Henderson shouted back, his face a mask of sweat and determination. "We're using the East Arterial. It's a 10-mile straight shot. We'll have them clear in 20 minutes. Maya stood at the edge of the circle, her clipboard trembling slightly in her hand. She had checked her data 3 times. She had confirmed the pattern with every returning vehicle. The East Gate wasn't just slow, it was actively congesting. The reddish clay she had seen earlier was a sign of a deep soil washout. It was the kind of mud that swallowed tires, broke axles, and turned minutes into hours of stranded terror. She looked at the group waiting in the hallway. There were 50 people, mostly elderly, some in wheelchairs clutching thin blankets, others holding small plastic bags of essential medicine. They were looking at the staff with a desperate, silent trust. They believed the people in their reflective vests knew the way. They didn't know that the way was about to disappear under a foot of red slime. "Mr. Henderson," Maya said. Her voice was too quiet. It was swallowed by the roar of the rain and the shouting of the logistics team. "Mr. Henderson," she said again, louder this time. She stepped into the light of the central table, her blue uniform a stark contrast to the orange vests. The circle of coordinators stopped. Henderson turned, his eyes bloodshot and his face flushed with the immense stress of the morning. He saw a nurse in a plain blue uniform, her apron smudged with ink, and her shoes covered in gray silt. "Not now, Maya," he said, his tone dismissive and sharp. "We're in the middle of a tactical shift. If you have medical questions about the triage, take them to Dr. Aris. We're busy with the transport." "It's not a medical question, sir," Maya said, stepping forward even further, refusing to be pushed back into the shadows. "It's about the East Arterial. You shouldn't send the next wave through there. It's a mistake." The room went silent. It was a cold, uncomfortable silence that made the rain on the roof sound even louder. The other coordinators looked at each other with raised eyebrows and mocking smiles. One of them let out a short, dry chuckle that felt like a slap in the face. "She's just a nurse," someone whispered in the back, loud enough for her to hear. "What does she know about route optimization and tire soil friction?" Henderson took a deep, shaky breath, trying to maintain his professional composure. "Maya, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But we have satellite data from an hour ago. We have topographic maps. That road is the shortest path to the camp. Every minute we hesitate, the rain gets worse and the risk increases. Now please get back to your station and help with the water distribution." "The maps don't show the mud, sir," Maya persisted, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she had. "The vehicles coming back from the East Gate are reporting a 15-minute lag. Every single one of them for the last 3 hours has been late, and they're covered in red clay. That only happens when the subsoil is saturated and the roadbed is failing. The satellites can't see through the trees, but I can see the tires. Red clay? Henderson asked, his eyes flickering toward the map for a split second before returning to her with renewed irritation. Maya, everyone is covered in mud. It's raining. This isn't the time for a geology lesson. No, sir, she said, her voice gaining a steady analytical edge that began to demand attention. The north path is gray silt. It's rocky and drains well. The east path is red clay. It's an absorbent soil that turns into a trap. The north path vehicles are returning on time. The east path vehicles are late. If you send this group of elderly patients through the east gate, the congestion will trap them. They won't just be late, they'll be stuck in the middle of a storm with no medical support and no way to turn around. The pressure in the room was palpable. Henderson looked at the clock, then at the shivering group in the hallway, then back at Maya. He was a man who lived by the manual and the plan. To change the plan based on the hunch of a nurse was to admit that his expertise was incomplete, that the machine he ran was flawed. We don't have time for hesitation or second guessing, another coordinator added, checking his watch. We need action. The east gate is the plan. We stick to the plan. Maya felt the sting of their doubt. She felt the weight of her role, the junior staff member who was supposedly out of her league. She realized that words weren't enough to break their pride. They didn't trust her voice because it didn't come from a position of power. They didn't trust her eyes because she wasn't looking at a screen. She turned away from the circle. She didn't go back to her station. She went to the communication desk in the corner of the room. She saw the radio sitting there, unused, a black plastic brick of potential. The professional dispatchers were busy on their phones, trying to reach higher-level officials to ask for more resources that weren't coming. Maya didn't ask for permission. She knew that in a few minutes the trucks would start rolling toward the east gate, and once they started, they wouldn't stop until they hit the mud. She picked up the handset. Her hand was steady. "This is Station 1 intake," she said into the radio. Her voice was calm, clear, and projected a level of authority that made the room stop. The room went quiet again, but this time it was different. Henderson stepped toward her, his hand reaching for the radio, his face a mask of fury. "Maya, what are you doing? Put that down. You're interfering with a critical operation." Maya didn't look at him. She stared at the wall, waiting for the response. She was no longer just a nurse. She was the only one in the room who was actually listening to the ground. "This is Station 2 reception," a crackling, distant voice replied through the static. "Go ahead, Station 1. Maya took a deep breath. She was about to make a call that would either save hundreds of hours of human suffering or end her career before it had even begun. She chose the people over the protocol. "Station 2, this is Nurse Maya," she said, ignoring Henderson's hand, which was now hovering inches from the radio. "I need an immediate verification of your current loopback time for the East Arterial. Specifically, are you seeing a rise in engine temperature or axle strain on the returning units?" There was a long pause. The only sound in the room was the heavy rain on the roof and the sound of the coordinator's breathing. "Station 1, give us 30 seconds, the voice replied. Henderson grabbed the radio. "Station 2, disregard that. We are proceeding with the East Gate departure as scheduled. The nurse was..." "Wait!" The radio barked back, louder this time. "Station 1, wait. We just checked with the last driver. He didn't report it on the official log because he was in a hurry, but he says the 3-mile marker is turning into a swamp. He barely made it out. Engine is smoking. He says if we send one more heavy unit through there, the road will collapse." The entire room froze. Henderson's hand dropped. The other coordinators looked at Maya as if they were seeing her for the first time. Maya took the radio back from Henderson. He didn't fight her this time. "Station 2, Maya said, her voice a cool anchor in the rising panic. "How is the North Gate loop? I've been tracking their arrival times. They seem stable." "North Gate is clear," the voice replied. "It's longer, but the ground is rocky. Drainage is better. We can receive them there, but we need to reroute the empty vehicles to meet them halfway." "Maya, how did you know?" "I watched the tires," she said simply. She turned to Henderson. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look like she was waiting for an apology. She looked like a nurse who was ready to work. "Sir," she said, If we move the elderly group through the north gate now and send the medical support van ahead of them, we can have them in the safe zone in 90 minutes. If we had gone east, we would have lost the vehicles and potentially the patients. Henderson looked at the board. He looked at the list of names. He realized that Maya hadn't guessed. She had been doing the job of a coordinator while she was doing the job of a nurse. She had been observing the data of reality while they were observing the data of the plan. "Make the adjustment," Henderson said, his voice quiet. He looked at his team. "Cancel the East Gate departure. Switch all transit to the North Path. Now!" The room exploded into a different kind of activity. It was no longer frantic. It was focused. Maya went back to her small desk. She didn't stand in the center of the room. She didn't wait for a medal. She picked up her pen and began to check off the names as the elderly residents were helped into the waiting vehicles. "Thank you, Maya," Henderson said, walking over to her. He looked embarrassed. A man of power who had just been saved from a catastrophic mistake by a person he had deemed irrelevant. "You don't have to thank me, sir," Maya said. "I just didn't want them to wait in the rain." "You were right about the lag," Henderson admitted, looking at her messy notes in the margins. "We were so focused on the shortest path that we didn't look at the flow. We almost missed the truth." "It's easy to miss things when everyone is shouting," Maya replied. This was the soft twist of the story. It wasn't about a hero who used strength to save the day. It was about a person who used attention. The call that saved time was possible because Maya had respected the small details. She hadn't seen the evacuation as a logistical puzzle. She had seen it as 50 human beings who were tired, cold, and scared. The vehicles departed through the north gate. Maya watched them go, the taillights disappearing into the gray mist of the rain. There was no music. There was no celebration. Just the sound of engines moving at a steady, reliable pace. An hour later, the radio crackled again. "Station 1, this is Station 2. First wave of Northgate transit has arrived. All stable. Average transit time, 82 minutes. That's 10 minutes faster than our best Eastgate estimate. Good call, Station 1. Henderson looked at Maya. He didn't say, "She's just a nurse," ever again. He realized that in a crisis, the most valuable person isn't always the one with the loudest voice or the most important title. Sometimes it's the person who is quiet enough to notice the color of the mud on a tire. Maya continued her work. She was still simple, still quiet. She helped an old woman find her glasses. She brought a glass of water to a crying child. She was still a nurse, but the room was no longer the same. The experts now looked at the map, then at her, then back at the map. They had realized that time wasn't measured by clocks. It was measured by the quality of your attention. The change in the schoolhouse didn't happen with a formal announcement. There were no certificates handed out, and Maya's name wasn't called over a loudspeaker. But a ripple had been created in the way the staff handled the next dozen groups. The Maya mindset began to spread. The coordinators stopped shouting and started asking. When the next truck arrived, a coordinator named Sarah, the one who had chuckled earlier, walked over to the driver. She didn't just ask for the numbers. She looked at his tires. She looked at the way he sat in his seat. "How was the drainage on the North Ridge?" Sarah asked. "A bit slick," the driver replied, "but the rock base is holding." Sarah wrote it down. She then looked at Maya and gave a small respectful nod. The hierarchy was still there, but it was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. People were no longer afraid to point out a discrepancy. They realized that a small wrong caught early is better than a big right that fails late. Maya stayed at her post until 3 a.m. The station was quieter now. Most of the vulnerable groups had been moved. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. She was exhausted, her eyes stinging from the dim light. But she felt a profound sense of peace. A young intern fresh out of medical school sat down next to her during a brief break. He was staring at the floor, his hands shaking slightly from the stress of the day. "How do you do it?" he whispered. "How do you stay so calm when everything is falling apart?" Maya looked at him. She saw the same fear she had felt during her first week on the job. "I don't look at the everything," she said softly. "I just look at the one thing in front of me. If that thing doesn't look right, I ask why. Usually the answer to the big problem is hidden in that one small thing." The intern nodded, absorbing the advice. I thought today was about being fast. I almost missed a patient's heart murmur because I was rushing to finish the chart. Rushing is the enemy of the truth, Maya said. In this building, we're trying to save lives. But sometimes saving 5 minutes is more important than saving 5 seconds. You only save minutes if you're willing to slow down and look. This was the ripple effect. Maya hadn't just saved time for the evacuees. She had saved the staff from their own frantic efficiency. She had shown them that care isn't just about medicine. It's about witnessing the reality of the people in your care. One of the elderly men she had helped earlier, a man who had been moved through the north gate, sent a message back via the radio. He wanted the nurse with the quiet voice to know that he had made it to the camp in time for his evening insulin. Henderson, who heard the message, walked over to Maya's desk and placed a small, warm cup of coffee in front of her. "You didn't just save time today, Maya," he said. "You saved his dignity. He didn't have to wait in the mud. He didn't have to be a problem for the system. He was just a man going home." Maya took a sip of the coffee. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "We're all just people trying to get home, sir." As the morning sun began to peek through the clouds, casting a soft, pale light over the schoolyard, the last of the trucks pulled out. The temporary station was closing down. Maya packed her small bag, tucked her notebook into her pocket, and walked toward the exit. She wasn't a hero in the movies. She wasn't a general. She was a nurse. But as she walked out into the fresh morning air, she knew that she had made the right call. And in a world that is always rushing, that was the greatest victory of all. The story of Maya in the schoolhouse is a reminder for all of us, especially in a world that values the loud, the fast, and the powerful. We often think that to make a difference, we have to be the person in the reflective vest. We think we need a title, a platform, or a microphone to be heard. We wait for the grand opportunity to be a hero, while we ignore the small opportunities to be useful. Maya reminds us that the most important data point in any crisis isn't a number on a screen. It's the human reality in front of us. In your own life, you may feel like just a voice in the crowd. You may feel like just an employee, just a student, or just a supporter. You may feel that your observations don't matter because you aren't the one holding the map, but you are the one who is touching the ground. You are the one who sees the color of the mud. You are the one who hears the tremor in a voice. Excellence is not about never making a mistake. It is about having the courage to question the plan when the terrain changes. It is about realizing that every person in the room has a piece of the truth, from the senior coordinator to the nurse in the corner. How many times have you seen something that didn't fit? How many times have you noticed a small wrong, but chose to stay silent because you didn't want to be that person? Maya's superpower wasn't a degree in logistics. It was her attention. It was her refusal to let the noise of the world drown out the whisper of her conscience. Impact doesn't have to be loud. In fact, the most profound changes often happen in total silence. In the observation of a tire, the recording of a timestamp, and the decision to pick up a radio when no one else is looking. The elderly residents are safe today. The trucks are back in their bays. The schoolhouse is quiet once more. What will you notice today that everyone else is rushing past? What small wrong will you choose to address? Sometimes the most viral thing you can do is simply to pay attention. One move, total silence, and a world made better because someone dared to look at the mud instead of the map. Be the person who watches the tires. Be the person who asks why. Be the voice that breaks the silence and reminds us all of what truly matters. The biggest truths are waiting for you to see them. Will you be the one to pay attention? The call that saves the most lives is often the one that was made in a whisper. What will your call be?